Memoirs. 2 decades have gone by since the meeting of the khruschevites. Memoirs. 2 decades have gone by since the meeting of 81 communist and workers' parties of the world, which has gone down in history as one of the most important events in the struggle which is being waged between Marxism-Leninism and opportunism. At this meeting our party opened fire on the revisionist group of Khrushchev which was ruling in the Soviet Union and struggling in every way to subjugate the entire international communist movement, all the communist and workers' parties of the world, and set them on its road of betrayal. Our open and principled attack on Khrushchevite modern revisionism at the meeting in November 1960 was not a surprise move. On the contrary, it was the logical continuation of the Marxist-Leninist stand which the Party of Labour of Albania had always maintained, was the transition to a new, higher stage of the struggle which our party had long been waging for the defense and consistent application of Marxism-Leninism. From the time the khruschevites took power to the moment when we came out in open confrontation with them, the relations of the Party of Labour of Albania with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union went through khruschevites. A complicated process, with zigzags, with periods of exacerbation and periods of temporary normalization. This was the process of each getting to know the other through encounters in the course of the struggle and the continual clash of views. After the Khrushchevite revisionist putschists came to power, our party, basing itself on the events that were taking place there, on certain stands and actions, which were ill-defined at first, but which, step by step, were becoming more concrete, began to sense the great danger of this clique of renegades, which hid behind a deafening pseudo-Marxist demagogy, and to understand that this clique was becoming a great threat both to the cause of the revolution and socialism, as a whole, and to our country. We became more and more aware that the views and stands of Nikita Khrushchev on important questions of the international communist movement and the socialist camp differed from our views and stands. The 20th Congress of the CPSU, in particular, was the event which made us adopt a stand of opposition to Khrushchev and the Khrushchevites, as Marxist-Leninists and in a Marxist-Leninist way. Time after time we had pointed out to the Soviet leaders our reservations and objections to their conciliatory stands towards the Yugoslav revisionists, about many aspects of their unprincipled foreign policy, about many of their wrong and completely un-Marxist stands and actions on major international problems, etc. Although they sometimes feigned a retreat, they continued on their course, while we refused to swallow what they served up to us, but on the contrary, defended our views and implemented our internal and external policy. With the passage of time this brought about that we became better acquainted with each other's positions, and neither side trusted the other. For our part, we continued to preserve our friendship with the Soviet Union, with its Enver Hoxha 100 peoples, continued to build socialism according to the teach Stalin, continued as before to defend the aims of Lenin and great Stalin and his work and to fight unwaveringly against Yugoslav revisionism. Our existing doubts about the Soviet revisionists increased and deepened from day to day, because day by day Khrushchev and company were acting in opposition to Marxism-Leninism. Khrushchev was aware of our reservations about the 20th Congress, and about the policy which he followed with the Titoites, imperialism, etc., but his tactic was not to hasten to exacerbate the situation with us Albanians. He hoped to profit from the friendship which we displayed for the Soviet Union to take the Albanian fortress from within and to get us into the bag with smiles and threats, by giving us some reduced credits, as well as through pressure and blockades. Khrushchev and the Khrushchevites thought, we know the Albanians. However stubborn they are, however hot-tempered they are, they have nowhere else to turn to, because we have them pinned up and, if they prove difficult, if they don't obey us, then we will show our teeth, we'll cut them off and boycott them, and overthrow all those who oppose us. The Khrushchev group prepared this course of action, promoted and deepened it, thinking that it would achieve its aim quietly and gently and without any fuss. However, the reality was convincing them that this tactic was yielding no fruit, and thus their impatience and arrogance began to emerge. The situation became tense. Then it was eased only to grow tense again. We understood where this course would lead Khrushchev and company, therefore we strengthened our vigilance, and while replying to manifestations of their despotism, we tried to prolong the peace, while safeguarding our principles. Full to over, but the moment came when the cup was exist before, flowing. The peace, which had seemed to Khrushchevites 101 could continue no longer. Khrushchev went openly on to the attack to subjugate and force us to follow his utterly opportunist line. Then we told Khrushchev bluntly and loudly no, we said stop, to his treacherous activity. This marked the beginning of a long and very difficult struggle in which our party, to its glory and the glory of the people who gave birth to it and raised it, consistently safeguarded the interests of its socialist homeland, persistently defended Marxism-Leninism and the genuine international communist movement. At that time many people did not understand the attitude of the Party of Labour of Albania. There were even well-wishers of our party and country who considered this action hasty. Some had not yet completely understood the Khrushchevites' betrayal. Some others thought that we broke away from the Soviet Union to link up with China, etc. Today, not only the friends, but also the enemies of socialist Albania have understood the principled character of the uninterrupted struggle which our party has waged and is waging against opportunists of every hue. Time has fully confirmed how right the Party of Labour of Albania was to fight the Khrushchevites and refuse to follow their line. To this fight, which demanded and still demands great sacrifices, our small homeland owes the freedom and independence it prizes so highly in its successful development on the road of socialism. Only thanks to the Marxist-Leninist line of our party did Albania not become and never will become a protectorate of the Russians or anyone else. Since 1961 our Party of Labour has not had any link or contact with the Khrushchevites. In the future, too, it will never establish party relations with them, and we do not have and will never have even state relations with the Soviet social imperialists. As up to now, our party will consistently wage the ideological and political struggle for 102. Enver Hoxha. The exposure of these enemies of Marxism-Leninism. We acted in this way both when Khrushchev was in power and when he was brought down and replaced by the Brezhnev team. Our party had no illusions, but on the contrary, was quite certain that Brezhnev, Kosygin, Suslov, Mikoyan, and others who had been Khrushchev's closest collaborators, and had jointly organized and put into practice the revisionist counter-revolution in the Soviet Union, would persist in their former line. They eliminated Khrushchev with the aim of protecting Khrushchevism from the discredit which the master himself was bringing upon it with his endless buffoonery, eliminated the father with the aim of implementing the complete restoration of capitalism in the Soviet Union with greater intensity and effectiveness. In this direction Brezhnev and company have proved to be the worthy pupils of their ill-famed teacher. Within the Soviet Union they established and strengthened the dictatorial fascist regime, while they turned the foreign policy of their state into a policy of great state chauvinism, expansion and hegemonism. Under the leadership of the Brezhnev Khrushchevites, the Soviet Union has been turned into an imperialist world power and, like the United States of America, aims to rule the world. Among the bitter evidence of the utterly reactionary policy of Soviet social imperialism are the tragic events in Czechoslovakia, the strengthening of the domination of the Kremlin over the countries of the Warsaw Treaty, the deepening of. See article with the downfall of N. Khrushchev-Khrushchevite revisionism has not been eliminated. Enver Hoxha, Selected Works, Vol. 3, 8 Nintori Publishing House, Tirana 1980, pp 657-665, and ed. 1. Khrushchev was relieved of his functions on October 14, 1964. 2. In August 1968 the armies of the Soviet revisionists and their satellites occupied Czechoslovakia. Khruschevites. Their all-round dependence on Moscow and the extension of the tentacles of Soviet social imperialism to Asia, Africa, and elsewhere. The correct assessments and forecasts of our party about the reactionary internal and foreign policy of Brezhnev have been and are being constantly confirmed. The most recent example is Afghanistan, where the Brezhnev-Khrushchevites undertook an open fascist aggression and now are trying to quell the flames of the people's war there with fire and steel in order to prolong their social imperialist occupation. The fact that our small homeland and people have not suffered the tragic fate of all those who are now languishing under imperialist or social imperialist slavery is the best testimony to the correctness of the consistent, courageous and principled line which our party of labor has always followed. The merit of this correct course belongs to the whole party and, in particular, to its leadership, the Central Committee, which, imbued with and loyal to the teachings of Marxism-Leninism, our guiding theory, has always led the party and the people correctly. In the great tests which we have had to withstand, the unity of the party with its leadership and the unity of the people around the party have been brilliant and have become further tempered. This steel unity gave the party support and strength in the difficult but glorious struggle against the Khrushchevite revisionists, too. This unity has been and is the foundation of the stability and confidence with which Albania has marched and is marching forward, withstanding the pressure and blackmail, the blandishments and demagogy of enemies of all hues. As a communist and leader of the party, I, too, have. 3. In the end of December 1979. 104. Enver Hoxha. Had to take part actively in and make my contribution to all this heroic struggle of our party. Charged by the party and its leadership since the liberation of Albania, and especially during the years 1950 to 1960. I have headed delegations of the party in the state many times in official meetings with the Soviet leaders and with the main leaders of other communist and workers' parties. Likewise, many times we have exchanged reciprocal visits. I have taken part in consultations and international meetings of communist parties at which I have expressed and defended the correct line, decisions and instructions of the party. In all these meetings and visits I have become closely acquainted with glorious, unforgettable leaders, like Stalin, Dimitrov, Gould, Bayrat, Peake and others, and likewise, I have had to enter into contact with and know the khruschevites traitors, who, through a long and complicated process, gradually usurped power in the Soviet Union and in the former countries of People's Democracy respectively. The relations with them and the stands maintained by our party during this period have been reflected in the documents of the party, in my writings which are being published by decision of the Central Committee, as well as in other documents which are found in the Central Archives of the party. Now I am handing over these notes for publication as my reminiscences and impressions from the many contacts and clashes with the Khruschevites, which cover the period from 1953, after the death of Stalin, to the end of 1961, when the Khrushchev group broke off diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of Albania. Taken together with other published materials and documents covering that period, these notes, too, I believe, will serve to acquaint the communists and working masses better, both with the counter-revolutionary activity of the Soviet revisionists inside and outside the Soviet Union, and with Khruschevites. 105. The always correct and consistent struggle of our party in defense of Marxism-Leninism, the people, and our socialist homeland. One of the main directions of Khrushchev's strategy and tactics was to seize complete political and ideological power within the Soviet Union and to put the Soviet army and the state security organs in his service. The Khrushchev group would work to achieve this objective step by step. At first, it would not attack Marxism-Leninism, the construction of socialism in the Soviet Union, and Stalin frontally. On the contrary, this group would base itself on the successes achieved and, moreover, would exalt them to the maximum in order to gain credit for itself and create a situation of euphoria, with the aim of destroying the socialist base and superstructure later. First of all, this renegade group had to get control of the party in order to eliminate the possible resistance of those cadres who had not lost the revolutionary class vigilance, to neutralize the waverers and win them over by means of persuasion or threats, as well as to promote to the key leading positions bad, anti-Marxist, careerist, opportunist elements of whom, of course, there were some in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the apparatus of the Soviet state. After the Great Patriotic War, some negative phenomena appeared in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The difficult economic situation, the devastation and destruction, the great human losses which occurred in the Soviet Union, required a total mobilization of the cadres and the masses for its consolidation and progress. How instead of this, a falling off in the character and morale of many cadres was noticed. On the other hand, through their conceit and boasting about the glory of the battles won, through their decorations and privileges, with 106. Enver Hoxha. Their many vices and distorted views, the power-seeking elements were overwhelming the vigilance of the party and causing it to decay from within. A caste was created in the army which extended its despotic and arrogant domination to the party, too, altering its proletarian character. The party should have been the sword of the revolution, but this caste corroded it. I am of the opinion that even before the war, but especially after the war, signs of a deplorable apathy appeared in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. This party had a great reputation and had achieved colossal successes in the course of its work, but at the same time it had started to lose the revolutionary spirit and was becoming infected by bureaucracy and routine. The Leninist norms, the teachings of Lenin and Stalin had been transformed by the apparatchiki into stale platitudes and hackneyed slogans devoid of operative worth. The Soviet Union was a vast country, the people worked, produced, created. It was said that industry was developing at the necessary rates and that the socialist agriculture was advancing. But this development was not at the level it should have been. It was not the wrong line of Stalin which held up the progress. On the contrary, this line was correct and Marxist-Leninist, but it was frequently applied badly and even distorted and sabotaged by enemy elements. Stalin's correct line was distorted also by the disguised enemies in the ranks of the party and in the organs of the state, by the opportunists, liberals, Trotskyites and revisionists, as the Khrushchevs, Mikoyans, Suslovs, Kosygin's, and others eventually turned out to be. Before the death of Stalin, Khrushchev and his close collaborators in the putsch were among the main leaders who acted undercover, who made preparations and awaited the appropriate moment for open action on a broad scale. It is a fact that these traitors were hardened. Khruschevites. 107. Conspirators, with the experience of various Russian counter-revolutionaries, the experience of anarchists, Trotskyites, and Bucharinites. They were also acquainted with the experience of the revolution and the Bolshevik Party, although they learned nothing of benefit from the revolution, but learned everything they needed to undermine the revolution and socialism, while escaping the blows of the revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat. In short, they were counter-revolutionaries and double dealers. On the one hand, they sang the praises of socialism, the revolution, the Bolshevik Communist Party, Lenin and Stalin, and on the other hand, they prepared the counter-revolution. Hence, all this accumulated scum carried out sabotage with the subtlest methods, which they disguised by praising Stalin and the socialist regime. These elements disorganized the revolution while organizing the counter-revolution, displayed severity against internal enemies in order to spread fear and terror in the party, the state, and the people. It was they who created a situation full of euphoria which they reported to Stalin, but in reality they destroyed the base of the party, the base of the state, caused spiritual degeneration and built up the cult of Stalin to the skies in order to overthrow him more easily in the future. This was a diabolical hostile activity which had a stranglehold on the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and Stalin, who, as the historical facts showed, was surrounded by enemies. Almost none of the members of the Presidium and the Central Committee raised their voices in defense of socialism and Stalin. If a detailed analysis is made of the political, ideological, and organizational directives of Stalin and the leadership and organization of the party, the war and the work, in general, mistakes of principle will not be found, but if we 108. Enver Hoxha. Bear in mind how they were distorted by the enemies and applied in practice, we will see the dangerous consequences of these distortions and it will become obvious why the party began to become bureaucratic. To be immersed in routine work and dangerous formalism which sapped its strength, strangled its revolutionary spirit and enthusiasm. The party became covered by a heavy layer of rust, by political apathy, thinking mistakenly that the head, the leadership, operates and solves everything on its own. From such a concept, the situation was created that in every instance and about everything they would say, this is the leadership's business, the Central Committee does not make mistakes, Stalin has said this, and that's all there is to it, etc. Stalin might not have said many things, but they were covered with his name. The apparatus and the officials became omnipotent, infallible and operated in bureaucratic ways under the slogans of democratic centralism and Bolshevik criticism and self-criticism, which were no longer Bolshevik in reality. There is no doubt that in this way the Bolshevik Party lost its former vitality. It lived on with correct slogans, but they were only slogans, it carried out orders, but did not act on its own initiative, with the methods and forms of work which were used in the leadership of the party, the opposite results were achieved. In such conditions bureaucratic administrative measures began to predominate over revolutionary measures. Vigilance was no longer operative because it was no longer revolutionary, regardless of all the boasting about it. From a vigilance of the party and the masses, it was being turned into a vigilance of bureaucratic apparatus and transformed, in fact, if not completely from a formal viewpoint, into a vigilance of the state security organs and the courts. It is understandable that in such conditions, non-proletarian, non-working class feelings and views began to take khruschevites. 109. Root and to be cultivated in the ranks of the CP of the Soviet Union and in the consciousness of many of the communists. Careerism, servility, charlatanism, unhealthy cronyism, anti-proletarian morality, etc., began to spread. These evils eroded the party from within, smothered the feeling of class struggle and sacrifice and encouraged seeking the good life with comforts, with privileges, with personal gains and the least possible work and effort. In this way the bourgeois and petty bourgeois mentality was created, and this was expressed in such words and thoughts as, we worked and fought for the socialist state and we triumphed, now let us enjoy the benefits from it, we can't be touched. The past excuses us for everything. The greatest danger was that this outlook was becoming established even in the old cadres of the party with a splendid past and proletarian origin, even in the members of the Presidium of the Central Committee, who ought to have set an example of purity to the others. There were many such people in the leadership, in the apparatus, and they made adroit use of the revolutionary words and phrases and the theoretical formulas of Lenin and Stalin, reaped the laurels of the work of others and encouraged the bad example. Thus, a worker aristocracy made up of bureaucratic cadres was being created in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Regrettably, such a process of degeneration developed under the joyful and hopeful slogans that everything is going well, normally, within the laws and norms of the party, which in fact were being violated, that the class struggle is still being waged, that democratic centralism is safeguarded, criticism and self-criticism continues as before, that there is still unity in the party, there are no more factional, anti-party elements, the time of Trotskyite and Bucharite groups is past, etc. etc. Generally speaking, even the revolutionary elements considered such a distorted concept of the situation to be a 110. Enver Hoxha. Normal reality and, this is the essence of the drama and the fatal mistake, therefore it was considered that there was nothing to be alarmed about, that the enemies, the thieves, the violators of morality were being condemned by the courts, that the unworthy members were being expelled from the party, and new members admitted to it, as usual, that the plans were being realized although there were some that were not being realized, that people were being criticized, condemned, praised. Hence, AC etc. According to them, life was proceeding normally, and thus it was reported to Stalin, everything is going normally. We are convinced that if Stalin, as the great revolutionary he was, had known the reality of the situation in the party, he would have struck a crushing blow at this unhealthy spirit and the entire party and the Soviet people would have risen to their feet to support him because, quite correctly, they had great trust in Stalin. Not only did the apparatuses misinform Stalin and bureaucratically deform his correct directives, but they had created such a situation among the people and in the party that even when Stalin went among the masses of the party and the people, to the extent that his age and health permitted, they did not inform him about the shortcomings and mistakes which were occurring, because the apparatus had implanted the opinion amongst the communists and the masses that we must not worry Stalin. The great hullabaloo the khruschevites made about the so-called cult of Stalin was really only a bluff. It was not Stalin, who was a modest person, who had built up this cult, but all the revisionist scum accumulated at the head of the party and the state which, apart from anything else, exploited the great love of the Soviet peoples for Stalin, especially after the victory over fascism. If one reads the speeches of Khrushchev, Mikoyan and all the other members of the Presidium, one will see what unrestrained khruschevites and hypocritical praises these enemies poured on Stalin as long as he was alive. It is sickening to read these things when you think that behind all this praise they were hiding their hostile work from the communists and the masses, who were deceived, thinking that they had to do with leaders loyal to Marxism-Leninism and comrades loyal to Stalin. Even for some time after Stalin's death, the new Soviet leaders, and Khrushchev above all, still did not speak badly about him, indeed they described him as a leader of indisputable authority, etc. Great man. Khrushchev had to speak in this way to gain credit inside and outside the Soviet Union, in order to create the idea that he was to socialism and the revolution, a continuer of the work of Lenin and Stalin. Khrushchev and McCoy were the bitterest enemies of Marxism-Leninism. And Stalin. These two headed the plot and the putsch which they had prepared long before, together with anti-Marxist, careerist elements of the Central Committee, of the army, and leaders at the base. These putschists did not show their hand immediately after the death of Stalin, but, when it was necessary and to the extent it was necessary, continued to administer the poison along with their praises for Stalin. It is true that McCoy, in particular, in the many meetings I have had with him, never boosted Stalin, irrespective of the fact that in speeches and discourses the putschists heaped praises and glory on Stalin on every occasion. They fostered the cult of Stalin in order to isolate him as much as possible from the masses, and, hiding behind this cult, they prepared the catastrophe. Khrushchev and McCoy worked to a plan and after the death of Stalin found an open field for their activity, also because of the fact that Malenkov, Beria, Bulganin and Enver Hoxha proved to be not only blind, but also ambitious, and each of them struggled for power. 112. Enver Hoxha. They and others, old revolutionaries and honest communists, had now turned into typical representatives of that bureaucratic routine, of that bureaucratic legality, which developed. And when they made a feeble attempt to use this legality against the obvious plot of the khruschevites, it was already too late. Khrushchev and McCoy, in complete unity, knew how to maneuver amongst them and to set one against the other. In a few words, they applied this tactic, split and divide in the Presidium, organize the forces of the putsch outside, continue to speak well about Stalin in order to have the million-strong masses on their side, and thus bring closer the day of the seizure of power, the liquidation of opponents, and of a whole glorious epoch of the construction of socialism, the victory of the patriotic war, etc. All this feverish activity was aimed to create the popularity of Khrushchev inside the Soviet Union and outside it. Under the umbrella of the victories which the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had scored under the leadership of Lenin and Stalin, Khrushchev did his utmost to make the Soviet peoples and the Soviet communists think that nothing had changed, one great leader had died, but a greater leader was rising. And what a leader he was! Principled and Leninist as the former, if not more so, but liberal, popular, smiling, all humor and jokes. Meanwhile the revisionist viper, which was becoming active, started to pour out its poison about the figure and work of Stalin. At first this was done without attacking Stalin by name, but attacking him indirectly. In one of the meetings which I had with Khrushchev, in June 1954, in an allegedly principled and theoretical way he began to expound to me the great importance of collective leadership, and the great damage which comes. Khruschevites. About when this leadership is replaced by the cult of one person, and mentioned isolated excerpts from Marx and Lenin, so that I would think that what he was saying had a Marxist-Leninist basis. He said nothing against Stalin, but he fired off all his batteries at Beria, accusing him of real and non-existent crimes. The truth is that in this initial stage of Khrushchev's revisionist assault, Beria was the appropriate card to play to advance the secret plans. As I have written above, Beria was presented by Khrushchev as the cause of many evils. He had allegedly underrated the role of the first secretary, damaged the collective leadership, and wanted to put the party under the control of the state security apparatus. On the pretext of the struggle against the damage caused by Beria, Khrushchev, on the one hand, established himself in the leadership of the party and state and took control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and on the other hand, prepared public opinion for the open attack which he was to undertake later on Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, and on the real work of the Bolshevik Communist Party of Lenin and Stalin. Many of these surprising actions and changes made an impression on us, but it was too early to be able to grasp the true proportions of the plot which was being carried out. Nevertheless, even at that time we could not fail to notice the contradictory nature of various actions and opinions of this new leader, who was taking over the reins in the Soviet Union. This same Khrushchev, who was now parading before us as a disciple of collective leadership, a few days earlier in a meeting which we had with him, when he spoke to us about the role of the first secretary of the party and the prime minister, presented himself as an ardent supporter of the role of the individual and the firm hand. After Stalin's death, it seemed an allegedly collect. 114. Enver Hoxha. Tive leadership was established by these adherents to principle. The collective leadership was publicized to show that Stalin had violated the principle of collective leadership, that he had degraded this important norm for Leninist leadership, and that the leadership of the party and the state had been transformed from collective leadership into individual leadership. This was a big lie, publicized by the khruschevites to prepare the ground for themselves. If the collective leadership principle had been violated, the blame for this must be laid, not on the correct ideas which Stalin expressed on different problems, but on the hypocritical flattery of those others and on the arbitrary decisions which they themselves took, distorting the line in the various sectors which they led. How could all the activity of these anti-party elements who worked around Stalin be checked upon, when they themselves spread the idea that Sekaz ne Tsayo? In this way they wanted to convince the party and the people that Stalin knows everything that is going on, and he approves everything. In other words, in the name of Stalin, and by means of their apparatchiki, they suppressed criticism and tried to turn the Bolshevik party into a lifeless party, into an organization without will and energy, which would vegetate from day to day, approving everything that the bureaucracy decided, concocted, and distorted. In the campaign allegedly for the establishment of the collective leadership, Khrushchev was trying to perform a sleight of hand trick, under cover of a deafening clamor about the struggle against the cult of the individual. There were no more photographs of Khrushchev on the daily press, no more big headliness boosting him, but another stale tactic was used. All the newspapers were filled with the Central Committee knows everything. Khruschevites. His public speeches, his discourses, reports about his meetings with foreign ambassadors, his nightly attendances at diplomatic receptions, his meetings with delegations of communist parties, his meetings with American journalists, businessmen and senators and Western millionaires, who were friends of Khrushchev. The aim of this whole tactic was to make a contrast with Stalin's method of working behind closed doors, of his sectarian work, which, according to the khruschevites, had allegedly been so harmful to the opening of the Soviet Union to the world. The purpose of this khrushchevite propaganda was to show the Soviet people that now they had found the genuine Leninist leader who knows everything, who settles everything correctly, who has extraordinary vigor, who is giving the proper reply to everyone, whose irresistible activity is putting everything right in the Soviet Union, cleaning up the crimes of the past, and assuring progress. Taken from the khruschevites.